Okay, thanks for joining us today. And if you're watching this online, Clint, can you go back one slide?
Mhm.
If you're joining us online and watching this webinar and recorded off of our YouTube channel, then we would ask you at the end to visit this web address, this http://go.unl.edu web address. We're doing a evaluation of our webinar programs and would sure like feedback to know what we've done right and what's worked well, and also there's an opportunity to provide us feedback on other questions, and I'll remind you of that at the end of this webinar and recording. With us today is Dr. Clint Krehbiel, and Dr. Krehbiel is the Marvel Baker head of the Animal Science Department and has been on faculty here at the University of Nebraska since January of 2017. And he was a longtime member on the faculty at Oklahoma State and worked in the feed yard cattle nutrition and metabolism area, and did a lot of collaborative work in animal health and effective nutrition on disease and so on and those outcomes. So for today's topic, we've asked Dr. Krehbiel to talk about, what are the impacts of cattle getting sick on kind of performance traits and things that we routinely measure. I think there's a lot of paradigms and thought processes that if cattle get sick, then their performance is just not going to be good and they're not going to be recoverable. And so I think Dr. Krehbiel will have some insight on that and look forward to his comments today. Thanks for doing it, Dr. Krehbiel.
Thanks, Galen. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I spent around 17 years in collaboration with the veterinary school at Oklahoma State studying various risk categories of calves on arrival and then how we ultimately manage those calves. And so I'll share some of our data with you today and a summary of some other literature around this topic. Certainly, I would assume that this audience understands the importance of bovine respiratory disease, or that complex, and it continues to be the most economically important disease in feed yards and stocker operations. About 2/3 of all feedlot mortalities are related to BRD, or shipping fever pneumonia, if you prefer that. And about 16.2% of all cattle that are placed in feed yards will experience bovine respiratory disease, according to the NOMS survey in 2011. And there's been some estimates of what that costs the industry annually. It's essentially about $1 billion issue with regard to bovine respiratory disease losses to the feed yard industry every year. So certainly a significant challenge for our industry. This is, again, some older data, and there's been more recent numbers, but the general trends, which is what's important here, are the same. And I say that because, again, we know that the markets change, and so these are always a snapshot in time with regard to the current value of those cattle. But cattle that are treated once, this is some of Bob Fulton's data out of Oklahoma State. Cattle treated once return $40 less. Cattle treated twice, $58 less. If you get into a chronic category with 3 or more treatments, it can be really significant. In this paper, $291 reduction in net return of those animals that ended up being classified as chronics. Brett Gardner did some interesting work early on. This would have been in the late 90s, indicating that about 21% of the decrease in value is related to medicine costs, but the majority, quite interestingly, is due to lower carcass weight and quality grade. But I'll talk about the way we think about that, because in most of those early studies, the health data and the ultimate then closeout data and carcass value data was taken from cattle that were loaded in pens all at the same time. and those cattle then were all treated with the same days on feed in terms of the out date. And so those animals that got sick never really had an opportunity to catch up, if indeed they are able to do so. So the changes in performance, and especially from the earlier data, if you look at the original literature, would involve decreased average daily gain, lower hot carcass weight, poor quality grades, or I should say marbling score that ultimately shifts the quality grade distribution towards select and away from choice and above. And of course, all indicators right that these cattle are leaner, and so yield grades would actually be improved, if you will, or shifted more towards ones and twos. So what I want to visit with you about today is really thinking about what is bovine respiratory disease and from a standpoint of its implications on performance, carcass quality, and then of course total value of those animals. And again, thinking about the original literature, really looking at performance from a constant days on feed. So you put 100 animals in a pen, and 16.2% of them on average, according to NOMS, get sick. And again, those animals never have an opportunity to recover, if indeed they could recover, because we're looking at those animals at a constant days on feed. Now, if we think about what might happen to performance with a common endpoint, in other words, if we take those animals to the same compositional endpoint, the same 12th rib fat, one, are we able to get animals there? And secondly, then, what is the implications from an economic standpoint, if indeed we are? And so again, I'll show you some literature with regard to basically endpoint, considering constant days on feed or carcass composition. There is some evidence for compensatory gain. Of course, I'll show you that data. The other item that the industry discusses quite a bit is how do we define chronic calves? And you all as feedlot operators obviously certainly will have your own definition. I'll talk about what we use and then some of the thoughts around the commercial feedlot industry, at least more in the southern Great Plains. How do we really manage those calves, okay? And so if indeed those animals get sick and we are simply slowing down their growth rate, so we're shifting them back, can we manage those animals in such a way that we can recuperate some of that value, which then would involve some sort of restart programs for those animals that had bovine respiratory disease. So this is some of the more original data, the older data. I'm getting older, so the data still seems fairly new, but we're in the middle of the 2000 teens, and so obviously time marches on. This is that Gardner data set showing that steers that were treated more than one time had about a 12% slower growth rate and 44-pound lighter carcasses after 150 days on feed, again with a constant days on feed endpoint. Oklahoma feed yard study indicated, this is the Bob Fulton work, indicated that calves again were worth $58 to $292 less if they were treated 2 or 3 times with a constant days on feed. And most of the Texas ranch to rail data has indicated reduced value as well, both on a live basis and a carcass basis with a constant days on feed. So I've had a couple of students ask the question, because we've been interested in nutrition and immune function interactions. And so what is the cost of an animal having to mount an immune response on the long-term ability of that animal to grow? So Ben Holland was really the first student that started digging through the literature. And 2007, Wagner published a paper from the New Mexico Ranch to Rail program from 2000 to 2003. They had ultrasound measurements on all of those calves, and they were actually sorted those into outcome groups for harvest. And they indicated that steers that were treated 2 or more times had equal hot carcass weight and marbling scores if they were fed for longer days on feed compared to their contemporaries. Now, again, gross income would have been lower because of the death loss and the railers. There is, again, some evidence for compensatory gain. Calves treated 2+ times had a 12% lower average daily gain to day 67, so early in the feeding period, but live weight was the same when fed to 185 days, and that was some of Deb Raber's work. Montgomery in 2009 observed increased pasture gains in calves that had been treated multiple times during a shorter receiving period. And then a study by Schneider in 2009 had a significant number of animals, 6,000 calves from 10 feed yards. So he then showed that treated calves gained 0.8 pound per day slower during receiving, but only 0.15 pound per day less when the entire finishing period was considered. And then we get into this idea of number of treatments and what is the implication for treating once, twice, or multiple times. I would say, at least in the Southern Great Plains, chronics have been defined as an animal that's been treated twice for bovine respiratory disease. Our program was actually 3 strikes and you're out. And so if you meet the clinical definition at least and temp 3 times for BRD, we treated 3 times, and after that, those calves were considered chronics. But the other then characteristics would be unthrifty appearance, continuing to lose weight, obvious observation in terms of being behind the home pen or the contemporaries in that pen, but still would not meet the criteria for being euthanized, would be, again, a definition of a chronic calf. So again, Ben Holland's thought process and this whole idea of what are the implications of BRD, and can an animal compensate for a slow start as a result of being sick or morbid? So we took calves, and a lot of them within respiratory disease in terms of the number of treatments that they received. So we were able to take a large group of calves, take them through a 65-day approximately receiving period, do the pull and treat to meet the clinical definition or our clinical definition of respiratory disease with the 4th sign, of course, being a temperature of 104 degrees or greater. Those animals then treated once, twice, 3 times or beyond, or eligible for beyond, or what we defined as chronic calves. We were able to sort in the feedlot pens and observe their growth performance and carcass merit following a feedlot phase. So the first study we did, and I'm only going to share some heifer data that we have. We've repeated this in steers, and it's published in Professional Animal Scientist. If you're interested in that, it's Blake Wilson or Wilson as the lead author on that study. But these were 5-weight heifers out of Kentucky, assembled at an order by our facility, and then shipped to Stillwater, Oklahoma in 2 separate shipments in 2007. And so early fall kinds of calves out of Kentucky, heifer calves. So we evaluated them each morning for clinical signs and assigned them a severity score of 0 to 4. So 0 would be healthy and 4 would be moribund. In other words, if you went in the pen and tried to goose the calf, they would not be able to get up. So I apologize that I'm mixing back and forth here between metric and English units, and I'll try to point those out. But again, for pounds and gains, it's just simply the number times 2.2 will get you in the ballpark. But 104 degrees C and a severity score greater than 3 was required for treatment. And so we had a 3 strike you're out program or protocol with Micatil for the first pull and treat for BRD, Baytril for the second treat, and then 2 doses of XNL 48 hours apart for the third treatment. Chronics then, if they met what I pointed out earlier as our definition, with the 3 treatments, still losing weight, still appearing unthrifty. They were removed from the home pens on or after day 21 of the receiving period. And then we sorted those animals into never treated, treated once, twice, or 3 times. And then those animals, again, that were considered chronic, we had a few of those animals that we were able to develop only 2 pens worth to be able to evaluate performance and carcass merit. So I'm going to go through some data here. And again, this is going to be in metric units. And so I apologize for my laziness, but hopefully the math here is fairly easy. This just shows the morbidity, okay, and then the head count for the animals that were treated once, or no, sorry, never treated, treated once, twice, 3 times, chronics, and in this category of high-risk calves that we would define as an unknown source with a lot of miles in between where they were purchased and where they were delivered. We had an 8% death loss in this particular group of heifers. Okay, so we ended up with 9 pens of never treats, 9 pens of treated once, 6 pens each of treated 2 or 3 times, and then again, only 2 pens of chronics. And I want to point out here that the days on feed then, to get to a similar compositional endpoint as we determined by ultrasound back fat, 163 days for the 0, 1s, and 2s on average in those pens, 182 days for the 3 treats, and 189 days for the chronics. So again, a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go through all of it for time's sake. But just to point out that on arrival, so the start of the receiving phase, body weights were similar, among all treatments, at least statistically. A lot of times when we've gone back and looked at our treat rates post-arrival, you can almost detect by body weight which animals might get sick. But day 0 then, so this is after 63 days of a receiving period, you can see a linear decrease in day 0 body weight, or the body weight when those animals started in the feedlot phase for the adaptation. But I want you to point out then that across those varying days on feed, 163 or the 186 or 189, that those animals generally compensated with the increased days on feed. So this then will be the average daily gain. Again, the receiving period, those animals that we pulled and treated, obviously slower gaining during the receiving period post-arrival. Again, from day 0 to end, so across the entire feeding period, we saw a nice compensatory response in gain, except for those 2 pens of chronics. And then if you factor in arrival to the end, you still note a linear decrease in average daily gain across the entire time of those calves being in the feed yard. So dry matter intake, then from day 0 to 65, linear decrease as the number of treatments went up in those calves, of course with the chronics being the lowest. If you express those on a percent of body weight, they're much more comparable across, of course, across those same time periods. But I'll point out then that by 66 to 122 days on feed and 123 to the end, and I didn't talk about the implant protocol, etc. Certainly these calves would have been implanted and then re-implanted. But 66 to 122, no difference in dry matter intake except for the chronics. And then from 123 to the end, no difference in dry matter intake amongst all of our treatment groups. But overall, again, the chronics had lower dry matter intake relative to the other treatment groups. So again, we see a classic compensatory growth response in terms of gain to feed, or you could inverse that and it would be a decrease for feed to gain. But certainly we see a compensatory growth response in these animals. that we were able to sort by number of times treated, placed in smaller finishing pens, and then fed for varying days on feed to get to the same carcass compositional endpoint. This is interesting then that for the never treated, treated once, treated twice, treated 3 times, and chronics, that for these 4 treatment groups, if you take them to the same back fat, there was no difference in hot carcass weight. Chronic calves, we never fully recovered the carcass weight on those animals. Again, interestingly, the one thing, although we didn't see any statistical differences in quality grade distribution, we did see a linear tendency for a linear decrease in marbling score as the number of times those calves were treated increased. Excuse me. So again, BRD resulted in losses in performance during the receiving phase, during preconditioning, but we saw a nice compensatory growth response, a classic compensatory growth response and gain in efficiency. And it took about 18 additional days on feed for heifers that were treated 3 times to have similar live and hot carcass weights relative to those animals that were never treated, those calves that were never treated. So we just finish up here thinking about some management strategies then for what are the options that a feed yard would have to handle these calves, especially the calves that have more than 2 treatments or 3 treatments or more, as would probably be more typical of the feedlot industry. You know, we added that extra treatment in there. A lot of the commercial industry would say you have 2 chances. And then that's your last chance. So the strategy is certainly you could euthanize those animals. You could keep treating them and hope for a miracle. But certainly that results in increased medicine costs. And the odds of success after 2 shots in a commercial yard is generally low. And of course, then we have the whole perception issue with regard to animal well-being and antimicrobial resistance, and all those topics for a different day. Another option would be to rail them immediately. So you stop the medicine costs. Certainly that decreases the risk of deads. You can recoup some of the revenue, but have to be very cautious with regard to residue to make sure you don't ship those animals prior to the days required for that antimicrobial to clear their system. Feed yard restart is another option where you're really targeting to ship with a home pen. So you have an observation pen, sort off the railers and restart them. A lot of things to think about with regard to the ration, to bedding, added hay, bunk space, whether or not you're going to continue to sort on those animals and then take them home back to the finished pen when they're greater than 950 pounds to keep them with their contemporary group. Of course, there's risks of deads there, labor and time, pen space, carcass discounts. All those things are important factors. And really the bottom line for all of these options is to consider what is the market price relative to the cost of getting those animals to market weight and taking the risk of the dead loss versus the railer price or realizing those animals immediately when you've confirmed them as chronics. There's also then a feed yard restart with extended days on feed. And I think based on our data and some other data, that is a potential opportunity, especially for calves that are coming in lightweight and high risk. And when they get sick, they just fall too far behind the pen. And so is there opportunities then to pull those animals out and give them a period of healing on grass or wheat or in a dry lot? Again, ration considerations there. Then slowly transition them to the finishing ration and take them to market weight. So basically, this is a true restart where they'd come out of the pen. You'd create a new pen or yard sheet for that group of animals and start them over as a group. So again, considerations: death loss, labor intensity, pen space, Again, in research yards, we don't have this problem, but if you're dealing with 100,000 head, obviously accounting becomes an issue because you have to track those animals with the original pen. And so do you sell them and then sell them on paper and repurchase them at a discount? All those are factors that one would have to consider. And then again, market price, understanding that you're going to be able to recoup the hot carcass weight and the quality grade, at least for a large proportion of those calves. Death loss will be greater in those restart calves relative to the contemporary yard. But again, what is the relative value of holding those animals to the similar hot carcass weight and quality grade, at least in terms of distribution, as their counterparts on arrival? Okay, so we did a spreadsheet, and this is on a different set of animals. This was on a set of steers, very similar protocol as the heifer study. We just considered then what the actual carcass price was. So again, this is these are numbers stuck in time, right, and relative to a different period. But looked at carcass value for never treated, treated once, twice, or 3 or 4 times, and so those chronics. And then compared that either to previous BRD treatment or to the animals that were never treated. Okay, considered all the costs, microbials, antimicrobials, labor, yardage, feed, the initial value of the calf then. So bottom line is to look at calf value difference from previous treatment. One time treated is about a $38 loss, twice in this data set, 108. The 3 or 4s, interestingly, were only 55. Why? Because they never ate the same amount of feed, and yet we got the efficiency compensatory gain response, again, which is interesting. But I need to point out that this does not factor in the additional death loss in those animals that were restarted, okay? So basically, it's going to cost you $38 for one, $146 for two, and $200 for 3 or 4 times. That's the total value of the calf relative to animals that never got sick. So what is the value of the calf if you were to realize that animal? And do you make up that value by restarting those animals and taking them through the entire finishing period? So implications: morbid cattle maintain the potential to produce carcasses of similar value to non-treated animals. Segregating and restarting calves treated for bovine respiratory disease could be a viable option and an alternative to realizing or railing those morbid cattle. And I'll tell you, there's some large yards in the southern Great Plains that have adopted that strategy. But again, it really boils down to the calculated break even based on various death loss risk scenarios versus what is the value of railing that animal at the time it is deemed as a chronic and has cleared the days required for getting rid of any potential residue from the antimicrobial. So be happy to address any questions here, Galen. If there are any, really appreciated the opportunity to share here briefly with you today some of the work I've done throughout my career, and anytime you do have questions, would love to visit with any of you about this topic.
Very good, Clint. I know there's some questions in the chat box, and there may be others that chime in. I just want to take a second and remind those that are watching this webinar recorded and online, we'd sure appreciate you evaluating the program by going to that Qualtrics evaluation and at that web address. For those that are watching today live, there's also a poll that's been brought up. As always, if you ever have questions in general in the feedlot extension area and help with feed yard questions, feel free to contact me. I just put my contact information on there, but clearly I'll get you in touch with the right experts if I can't answer the question or it's outside my area of expertise. So thanks for doing the webinar, Dr. Krehbiel. I'm going to stop recording and then we'll take some questions.